Everyone said she was too broken, but the Alpha King seeks to mend her. The sun sank behind the jagged peaks of Valdoria, painting the sky with streaks of blood red and gold. Mist rolled down the hills, curling like restless spirits across the valley. In the heart of this lonely land stood the ruined estate of Lady Seraphine, a place abandoned by joy but haunted by memory. Once her family had ruled with grace and kindness, but now the halls were empty, echoing only with whispers of sorrow and loss. Seraphine moved through the shadowed corridors, her bare feet brushing the cold stone floors. She wore a simple dress of deep gray, its hem frayed from years of neglect. Her dark hair hung in a loose braid, and her eyes, once full of hope, now carried a quiet wariness. Villagers whispered about her, calling her the Broken Lady, as if pain could define a soul. She had learned to carry their words like armor, but even armor could not shield one from loneliness. A raven perched on the balcony outside, its glossy black feathers catching the dying light. Seraphine watched it, feeling an odd kinship with the bird. Both of them had been left to wander, both of them carrying secrets. She reached for the balcony railing, her fingers tracing the cold stone, and for a moment she imagined a world where she was not alone. Her reverie shattered with the sound of hooves on the gravel path below. A messenger arrived, panting and covered in mud. "My lady," he gasped, "the king himself approaches your estate." Seraphine's heart skipped. King Kale, the Alpha King of Valdoria, was a man spoken of in fear and awe. His presence alone commanded obedience, yet there were rumors that his gaze could pierce a person's soul. Seraphine had never seen him, but she had felt his shadow in the whispers that reached even the most distant corners of the kingdom. The messenger bowed and fled, leaving her with the sound of approaching hooves. Seraphine hesitated. Should she greet him? Should she hide? Fear and curiosity battled within her, but something deeper, a strange pull, made her step forward. Kale arrived as the sun dipped completely below the horizon, his black cloak flowing behind him like liquid night. His armor gleamed faintly in the twilight, and his eyes were dark pools that seemed to see everything, even her deepest fears. Yet when he dismounted, he did not command or threaten. He simply looked at her, and in that silence there was both judgment and something unspoken, something softer. "Lady Seraphine," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper that carried over the wind. "Your estate is in shadow, yet it still stands. You are braver than they say." She blinked. "And you are braver than your tales," she replied, testing him, her voice steadier than she felt. Kale's lips curved into the faintest smile. "Perhaps, or perhaps the tales are wrong." He followed her into the great hall, and Seraphine noticed for the first time the carvings along the walls, scenes of battles, of kings and queens, and of creatures that seemed both human and animal. She had never looked at them closely, too used to the emptiness around her. Now under Kale's gaze, they seemed alive. "I come not to threaten," Kale said, his eyes scanning the hall. "I come because there are forces at work here that even you cannot face alone." Seraphine felt a chill. "I am not afraid," she said, though she knew fear well. She had learned it as a child when her family fell to an unknown curse. Nights of crying and shadows, days of whispered warnings and locked doors, fear had been her companion long before Kale arrived. "And yet," he replied, "there is fear in your eyes. Not of me, but of what you might become if you do nothing." The words struck her like a blade wrapped in velvet. She looked away, ashamed. No one had ever spoken to her like this, not her servants, not her neighbors, not even her reflection in the mirrors that always seemed to judge her. "Come with me," Kale said after a moment, his tone gentle but commanding. "You do not have to face this alone." Seraphine hesitated, but something deep inside her, a yearning she did not fully understand, made her nod. She wrapped her shawl around her shoulders, and together they stepped into the night, leaving the safety of the estate behind. The journey to Kale's castle was silent, save for the wind and the distant howl of wolves. Seraphine noticed how the moonlight glinted off his armor, casting shadows that danced like flames along the forest path. She wanted to speak, to ask why he cared, but no words came. Instead, she felt the strange warmth of his presence, a certainty that she had not known in years. When they reached the castle, it rose like a black mountain against the night sky. Towers pierced the clouds, and the gates, adorned with symbols of ancient power, seemed to hum with life. Kale opened the doors without a word, and Seraphine entered a hall lit by hundreds of flickering torches. Shadows moved like living things along the walls, but Kale's calm presence made the fear fade. "You are safe here," he said. "For now." Seraphine studied him, trying to understand the man behind the legend. He was fearsome, yes, but there was a weight in his eyes, a hint of loneliness. She wondered, not for the first time, if he too carried scars invisible to the world. Their conversation was interrupted by a sudden commotion outside. A dark shadow flickered across the outer wall, a shape that moved with unnatural speed and malice. Seraphine's heart raced. The curse that had haunted her family, the whispers of something terrible lingering in the woods, they were not gone. They were here. Cale moved instantly, drawing a blade that gleamed in the torchlight. "Stay behind me," he ordered. His voice was calm but firm, and Seraphine felt a strange comfort in his protection. The shadow struck, revealing itself as a twisted, spectral creature, its eyes glowing with a cold fire. Seraphine's pulse quickened, but instead of fleeing, she found herself frozen, caught between fear and fascination. The creature hissed, a sound like metal scraping bone, and lunged toward her. Cale stepped forward, meeting it with a swing of his sword. The clash of steel and shadow echoed through the hall, and Seraphine instinctively reached for him, her fingers brushing his arm. The touch sent a shiver through her, an unfamiliar warmth that made her heart ache. Together they fought, the Alpha King, fierce and unyielding, and the lady, trembling yet unbroken. The creature shrieked and vanished into the night, leaving only scorched marks on the stone floor. Cale lowered his sword and turned to her. "You have strength," he said, studying her closely. "More than you know." Seraphine's breath came in ragged gasps. I am broken," she whispered, the words tasting like shame. Cale shook his head. "No," he said softly, "you are wounded, and even the wounded can rise." For a long moment they stood in silence. The firelight flickered over his face, revealing a mixture of curiosity, concern, and something she could not name. And then, without warning, Cale's hand brushed hers again, lingering longer than necessary. The contact was electric, a spark that neither fear nor despair could extinguish. "Rest," he said finally. "Tomorrow we will speak of this and of what you can become." Seraphine retreated to the guest chambers, her mind a storm of emotions. She had always been alone, always been defined by what she had lost. But now, for the first time, someone saw not just her pain, but her potential. Her heart fluttered with a dangerous hope. As she lay in the darkened room, listening to the distant howl of wolves, Seraphine realized that the world had shifted. The Alpha King, feared by all, had stepped into her life, not as a conqueror, but as a guide, a protector, and perhaps something more. Outside, the moon bathed the castle in silver light, and the shadows seemed to breathe with anticipation. A storm was coming. She felt it deep in her bones, not just of rain and wind, but of fate, power, and desire. And she was no longer certain she wanted to hide from it. Somewhere in the night, a soft whisper echoed through the halls of the ruined estate she had left behind. It was a voice she had not heard in years, a warning and a promise. The curse was not gone. It waited, watching, testing, shaping the path she was about to walk. Yet even in the shadow of that unknown threat, Seraphine felt something she had not allowed herself in a long time. A spark of life, a flicker of courage, and against all odds, a fragile hope that she might not be too broken after all. And so, as the wind howled and the stars trembled above Valdoria, the lady and the Alpha King began a story neither of them fully understood. A story of shadows, power, and the slow, uncertain bloom of trust and something deeper still. The night stretched on, and in its quiet darkness, fate whispered its first promise. Their meeting was only the beginning. The morning light spilled through the high windows of Cale's castle, painting the stone halls in pale gold. Lady Seraphine had barely slept. Her dreams had been filled with shadows and whispers, echoes of the creature they had faced the night before. Yet, despite her unease, she felt a strange pull toward the castle, toward Cale himself. Something about him stirred a mix of fear and curiosity she had never felt before. Cale appeared in the hall as she gathered her thoughts, his dark cloak brushing the floor. His expression was calm, but there was an intensity in his gaze that made her pulse quicken. "You move like one who fears the world," he said softly, stepping closer. "But I see a strength in you that no one else notices." Seraphine hesitated. "Strength?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I am broken, everyone says so." Cale shook his head. "Wounds are not weakness. They are proof that you survived, proof that you can rise again." There was a pause. His words struck her like a spark in the darkness. For so long, she had believed herself incapable of anything but pain. And yet here was a man, strong, feared, and unyielding, who refused to see her as broken. "Come," he said. "There is much you must learn if you are to survive in my court." The castle was a labyrinth of shadowed corridors, hidden gardens, and high towers. Every corner seemed alive, as if the walls themselves remembered centuries of kings, queens, and the secrets they kept. Seraphine followed him silently, aware of how her own shadow stretched along the stone floor, mingling with his. Their first lesson came in the great hall. Cale guided her to a long table where scrolls, maps, and enchanted objects lay scattered. "The court is dangerous," he explained. "Nobles plot, alliances shift, and enemies watch from the shadows. You cannot afford to be weak or uncertain, but you have a gift. One day it may save you and me." Seraphine looked down at her hands, unsure what he meant. She had lived her life avoiding attention, hiding the strange, restless power that simmered inside her. Yet Cale's words made her wonder if that power could be more than a curse. Could it be a weapon, a shield, or even a key? Days passed in a strange rhythm. Cale taught her the ways of the court, how to read a person by their eyes, how to sense danger in a whisper, how to protect herself without revealing too much. And in each lesson their connection deepened. Small touches, his hand brushing hers as he guided her scrolls, a glance that lingered too long, sent shivers through her. She was drawn to him, though fear whispered that his world was too powerful, too dangerous for someone like her. One evening, Cale led her to the castle's library, a towering room filled with books bound in worn leather. The smell of old paper and ink was comforting, almost sacred. He gestured to a scroll that shimmered faintly under the torchlight. "This," he said, "is not just knowledge. It is power, and power without control is dangerous." Seraphine traced her fingers over the scroll, feeling a warmth ripple through her. The symbols on the parchment seemed to pulse in rhythm with her heartbeat. I don't know if I can control it," she admitted. Cale knelt beside her, close enough that she could feel the heat of his body. "You will," he said, his voice steady. "I will help you, but you must trust yourself and trust me." For a moment, the world outside the library faded. It was just the two of them, caught in a silence that spoke louder than any words. Seraphine wanted to reach for him, to lean into the comfort he offered, but a part of her hesitated. Fear was a constant companion, and trust was fragile. Their training was interrupted by news from the court. A masked ball was to be held in honor of a visiting ambassador from a neighboring kingdom. Cale explained that this was not merely a celebration, but a test. Eyes would watch her every move, and enemies might use the gathering to strike. "You will attend," Cale said, his gaze piercing. "You must show them who you are, not the broken lady, but someone strong, someone untouchable." Seraphine nodded, feeling both excitement and dread. She had never been in such a grand hall, filled with nobles draped in silks and gold. The chandeliers sparkled like frozen stars, and the music swirled through the air, hypnotic and enchanting. As she moved through the crowd, Cale at her side, whispers followed her. Some were filled with awe, others with fear. She could feel the weight of their judgment, but also the pull of her own growing confidence. For the first time in years, she felt seen, not as a victim, but as a person with strength. The night grew darker, and the masked ball became a game of shadows. Seraphine noticed subtle glances, secretive conversations, and hidden threats. One noble, a tall man with a cunning smile, stepped too close, his intentions clear. Before she could react, Cale's hand rested on her waist, steadying her, protective. The simple touch sent warmth through her chest, grounding her amidst the uncertainty. "Do not fear," he whispered just for her. "I am here." Then, without warning, a magical disturbance rippled through the hall. A chandelier swung violently, and torches flickered as if a storm had entered the room. Seraphine felt her own power stir, a strange, pulsing energy she had tried to suppress. She did not understand it, yet instinctively she extended her hand. A wave of light burst forth, deflecting the falling chandelier and sending the crowd into startled whispers. The nobles stared in shock at the lady who could command power with a mere gesture. Some were afraid. Others were curious, and Cale's eyes held a mix of awe and concern, as if he had glimpsed the depth of her hidden potential for the first time. "You did it," he said, voice low and steady. "You controlled it." Seraphine's hands trembled. I didn't mean to." "I don't know how I did it." Cale placed his hand over hers, not just to steady her, but in a silent act of connection. "It is part of you, part of what makes you strong. Do not fear it, learn it, master it." For a moment their eyes met, and the world fell away. The music, the nobles, the flickering lights, all of it disappeared. Only the space between them remained, charged with something neither had spoken aloud but both understood. trust, curiosity, and a slow, growing bond that defied caution. The night ended with applause and whispers, some admiring, some fearful. Seraphine returned to her chambers, her heart pounding. She was exhausted, yet exhilarated. Her power had revealed itself in a way she never imagined, and Cale had been there, steady, commanding, and yet unexpectedly gentle. Days passed, and the court's scrutiny grew sharper. Nobles whispered about the lady who could command power, and some plotted to turn her gift against her. Seraphine realized that survival required more than strength. It required cunning, awareness, and alliances. Cale continued his lessons, teaching her not just to defend herself, but to navigate the delicate, dangerous dance of politics. One evening, he led her to the castle's highest tower. The view stretched across the kingdom, forests, rivers, and mountains bathed in the dying light of sunset. "This kingdom is full of danger," he said, his voice carrying over the wind, "but also full of opportunity, and you could be its greatest force." Seraphine gazed at the horizon, the wind tangling her hair. "But I am broken," she murmured. Cale shook his head, stepping closer. "You are not broken, you are tested, and every test you survive makes you stronger. You are not the same Lady Seraphine who wandered her empty halls in fear. You are someone new, someone powerful, someone unafraid to face the world." Their eyes met, and for the first time, Seraphine felt an unfamiliar warmth in her chest. Not desire, not yet, but hope. Hope that she could rise above the whispers, the shadows, and the curse that had followed her since childhood. And hope that perhaps she was not alone. As the sun disappeared below the mountains, the first stars appeared, faint and trembling. Cale's gaze lingered on her, unreadable yet filled with something she could not name. And in that silence, the castle itself seemed to hold its breath, as if anticipating the events to come. A sudden chill ran down her spine. From deep within the castle, a shadow moved, a dark, restless presence that reminded her of the creature from before. The curse was not gone. It was watching, waiting for the moment to return. Cale's hand rested on her shoulder, firm and grounding. "Whatever comes," he said, "we face it together, and remember, your power is not a curse. It is a weapon, a shield, and perhaps the key to something greater than either of us can imagine." Seraphine nodded, a mixture of fear and determination in her eyes. She was learning that strength was not just about survival. It was about trust, courage, and the willingness to face the unknown. And in the quiet of that tower, as the stars blinked into existence, she realized that she was beginning to trust him, herself, and the uncertain path ahead. But far below in the shadowed halls, whispers carried on the wind. Eyes watched from hidden corners, plotting, waiting. The court was not safe, the curse was not gone, and the night held secrets that could tear them apart. And yet, for the first time in years, Seraphine felt ready to face the storm. The forest stretched endlessly before them, dark and silent, as if the trees themselves held their breath. Lady Seraphine and King Cale moved through the misted paths, the air thick with magic and the scent of earth after rain. Their journey to the Eclipse Forest had begun, a place whispered about in fearful tales, where shadows were alive and the boundary between life and the supernatural thinned. Seraphine's heart pounded. She had faced strange powers before, but here the air itself seemed heavy with expectation. She glanced at Cale, who walked confidently beside her, his eyes scanning the gloom. His presence had become a steadying force, a tether to reality amidst the swirling magic. Yet she felt the weight of the forest pressing on her, as if it knew her deepest fears and sought to test them. "This forest is older than any kingdom," Cale said, his voice low, almost a whisper. "It holds the memories of those who came before. And it will challenge you, show you what you fear most, what you hide from yourself." Seraphine nodded, tightening the shawl around her shoulders. She had never spoken of the darkness inside her, the part of her that trembled at her own power. Cale did not ask. He simply walked beside her, silent and watchful, giving her courage without forcing her to speak. The trees grew taller, their twisted branches forming a canopy that blocked out the moonlight. Shadows pooled at their feet and whispers rustled through the leaves, soft as silk but sharp as knives. Seraphine felt her pulse quicken. The forest was alive and it was watching them. Suddenly, the mist thickened, curling around them like a living serpent. A cold wind swept through, carrying with it voices, distant, sorrowful, demanding. Seraphine shivered. She felt the pull of something dark within her, something she had tried to bury for years. Her curse, the force that had haunted her family, was stirring. Cale reached for her hand, steadying her. "Do not fear it," he said. "This is part of your path. You must face it or it will control you." Seraphine took a deep breath and nodded. She had always feared her own power, but now she understood that fear alone would not protect her. She had to confront it to accept it as part of herself. They pressed deeper into the forest, following a narrow path lined with blackened stones. The air grew colder and the shadows longer. Every sound seemed amplified: the snap of a branch, the rustle of leaves, the distant cry of a wolf. Seraphine's heart raced, yet she moved forward, trusting Kale and the strange strength that stirred within her. As they reached a clearing, the ground beneath them glowed faintly with a silver light. In the center stood a figure, cloaked in darkness, its face hidden beneath a hood. The air shimmered around it, heavy with power and intent. Seraphine recognized it immediately, the spirit that had haunted her dreams, the being connected to her curse. "You have come," the spirit said, its voice like the wind over graves. "I have waited for you, Lady Seraphine, and for you, King Kale." Kale stepped forward, placing himself between Seraphine and the spirit. "We will face you together," he said, his voice calm and strong. "We do not fear what is inevitable." The spirit's hooded head tilted, as if amused. "I do not bring fear," it said softly. "I bring truth. To conquer the darkness, you must face the abyss within yourselves. Only then will you understand your power and your bond." Seraphine felt a chill crawl over her. She had always known that her curse carried danger, but she had never realized its depth. The spirit raised its arms, and the silver light flared, enveloping them. The forest disappeared, replaced by a void of shadow and flickering stars. "You will each see what you hide," the spirit said. "Face it or be lost forever." Suddenly, Seraphine was alone. The void around her pulsed, and she felt herself falling, not through space, but through memory. Scenes from her past played before her eyes: the laughter of her family, the day the curse struck, the whispers of villagers calling her broken. Pain, shame, and guilt surged through her like a tidal wave. She stumbled, feeling powerless, until Kale's voice echoed in her mind. "You are not alone, Seraphine. Trust yourself. Trust me." The words anchored her. She lifted her head and focused on the warmth of his presence, even though he was not physically there. The darkness around her began to shift, responding to her will. She extended her hands, and the shadows recoiled, bowing to her control. Kale appeared beside her as if summoned by her determination. "Good," he said, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You see now, fear only has power if you give it. Your strength is your choice." Seraphine nodded, breathing deeply. The void around them began to dissolve, replaced by the familiar forest, though it now seemed sharper, more alive. The trees seemed to bow in respect, acknowledging the strength she had found within herself. But the spirit was not done. It reappeared, its voice stern. "Your power is formidable," it said, "but you cannot face what comes next without sacrifice. One of you must risk everything to break the chains that bind us both." Kale looked at her, his expression unreadable, yet there was a quiet trust in his eyes. "We face it together," he said. Seraphine swallowed hard. She knew what he meant. The curse, the bond, the destiny, they were intertwined. One of them would need to step forward, and the choice could change everything. As they moved deeper into the heart of the forest, the trees grew darker, twisted into forms that seemed almost human. Shadows whispered threats and promises alike. Seraphine felt the pull of her power, stronger than ever, and Kale's presence beside her was a tether to reality. They reached a clearing dominated by a black stone altar. The air hummed with energy, and Seraphine felt her curse stir in response. The spirit appeared once more, hovering above the altar. "To break the curse," it said, "you must offer something of equal value. Only by giving what you fear most can you release the chains that bind you both." Seraphine looked at Kale, her heart aching. She had learned to trust him, to rely on him, to care for him in ways she had never allowed herself before. But the fear of losing him, of failing, of being consumed by her own darkness pressed heavily on her. Kale stepped forward, his hand brushing hers. "Whatever is required, we face it together. I will not leave you, and I will not ask you to leave me." Seraphine drew a deep breath, feeling the warmth of his hand, the steadying force of his presence. She understood now that power was not just about control, but about trust, courage, and the willingness to risk everything for those you care about. The spirit's eyes glowed brighter, and the shadows around the altar twisted and writhed. Seraphine closed her eyes, reaching deep into herself, summoning the strength she had fought to understand. She felt her power surge, intertwining with Kale's, and together they channeled it toward the altar. Light and shadow clashed, a storm of energy that shook the forest. Trees bent, the ground trembled, and the air seemed to hum with magic. Seraphine's heart raced, but she did not falter. Kale's voice, steady and calm, guided her through the storm, and then with a final surge of will, the altar shattered. The chains that bound them both dissolved into silver mist, vanishing into the night. The spirit let out a sigh, soft and almost sorrowful, before fading into the air. Seraphine fell to her knees, exhausted but alive. Kale knelt beside her, placing a hand on her back, steadying her. "You did it," he said, his voice gentle. "We did it together." Tears stung her eyes, not from fear, but from relief. She had faced the darkness within herself and emerged stronger. She had learned that her curse was not a chain, but a part of her strength, and that trust, true trust, could overcome even the deepest shadows. Kale helped her to her feet, and they walked back through the forest, their hands brushing, their bond stronger than ever. The trees seemed to whisper around them, no longer threats but witnesses to their triumph. As they emerged from the forest, the first light of dawn broke over the horizon. The kingdom of Valdoria lay before them, bathed in gold. The journey had changed them both. Seraphine was no longer the frightened, broken lady of her estate. She was strong, capable, and ready to face whatever the court and the world might bring. But even in the light, shadows lingered. The court would not forget her power, and whispers of fear and admiration would follow her. The curse was broken, but destiny was not done with them. There were still secrets in Valdoria, still challenges to face, still hearts to protect. And as Seraphine looked at Kale, standing tall and unwavering beside her, she realized that she was not alone. The abyss had shown her fear, but it had also shown her strength, courage, and the bond that could endure anything. The forest behind them was silent now, yet its lessons lingered. Darkness had been faced, shadows had been tamed, and a new path had opened. A path of power, trust, and the slow, uncertain bloom of love. But as the sun rose higher, casting long shadows across the land, Seraphine could not shake the feeling that the night still held secrets. Eyes watched, whispers waited, and the story was far from over. And somewhere in the distance, a faint, silver glow shimmered in the shadows, a reminder that even triumph could carry a price yet to be revealed. The sun rose slowly over Valdoria, casting pale gold across the kingdom. Lady Seraphine stood at the castle balcony, the wind tangling her dark hair, her eyes scanning the horizon. She had faced the darkness in the eclipse forest, mastered the shadows within herself, and survived the trials that had once defined her as broken. Yet even as the light filled the kingdom, she felt the weight of what was yet to come. The court would not forget her power, and there were forces that still waited in the unseen corners of the realm. King Kale approached silently, his presence calm but commanding. He rested a hand lightly on her shoulder. "The forest tested you, Seraphine," he said, his voice low, full of quiet strength. "But the real test begins now. The court and the kingdom will challenge you, not with magic, but with fear, doubt, and envy." Seraphine turned to him, her eyes steady. "I am no longer afraid of what I am," she said, "and I trust you. Whatever comes, we face it together." Kale's eyes softened, but there was a flicker of concern. "Together," he repeated. "Yes. But some dangers cannot be faced with strength alone. They require courage, heart, and sacrifice." The castle bells tolled, announcing the arrival of emissaries from neighboring kingdoms. Whispers had spread since the events at the masquerade and in the forest. Some nobles came with respect, others with veiled threats. Seraphine could feel their eyes on her, measuring, judging, waiting for her to falter. Kale took her hand, a steadying anchor. "Remember," he said, "they will test you. But the strength you carry is not just magic. It is wisdom, courage, and heart. Do not doubt it." The first meeting was tense. Nobles gathered in the great hall, adorned in silks and jewels, their expressions carefully polite, but their eyes sharp and calculating. Seraphine's power had become the subject of fear and fascination. Many whispered that the lady who could control shadows and light was too dangerous, too unpredictable. A tall nobleman with a cunning smile stepped forward. "Your Majesty," he said, addressing Kale, "and Lady Seraphine, we acknowledge your unusual abilities, but power without guidance is a risk. We hope you understand the responsibilities you bear." Seraphine met his gaze steadily. "Power is responsibility," she said, her voice clear and firm, "and responsibility is not something I fear." The court murmured. Kale's eyes glimmered with pride. He had seen her grow, but the test was not yet over. Days turned into weeks, and Seraphine learned to navigate the subtle politics of the court. She used her power sparingly, letting her strength be felt without showing it fully. Her confidence grew, and the nobles who had doubted her began to measure her with caution. Some respected her, some feared her, but all recognized that she was no longer a frightened, broken lady. Even as the court settled into uneasy balance, a new threat emerged. A dark sorcerer, long exiled from Valdoria, returned seeking vengeance. He had once been a court advisor, but his desire for power had driven him to darkness. He bore a grudge against both Cale and Seraphine, knowing the bond between them had grown stronger with each trial they survived. The sorcerer's first act was subtle. Shadows moved unnaturally through the halls, whispers followed Seraphine, and strange symbols appeared on doors and walls. The kingdom felt a chill, even as the sun shone outside. Seraphine sensed the sorcerer's magic, a cold, twisting force that sought to divide, corrupt, and destroy. Cale stood beside her in the war council. "He wants to test us," he said, "to see if fear can break us, but we are stronger together. You and I, do you understand?" Seraphine nodded, determination blazing in her eyes. "I do, and I will not let him control me, or you." They journeyed to the sorcerer's hidden lair, deep in the shadowed mountains of Valdoria. The path was treacherous, the air heavy with magic, and every step forward a test of will. Seraphine felt the pull of her own power, dark and bright, mingling with Cale's strength. Together they moved with precision and trust. At the entrance of the lair, the sorcerer appeared, his eyes glowing with hatred. "So the lady and the king come to confront me," he said, his voice echoing through the stone corridors. "You think your bond can save you, but shadows have no loyalty." Seraphine stepped forward, feeling the pulse of power within her. "Shadows obey only those who command them with courage," she said, "and you underestimate what we carry: trust, heart, and unity." The battle that followed was fierce, though not of swords alone. Magic clashed with magic, light and shadow twisting around the chamber. Cale and Seraphine moved as one, their bond evident in every motion, every choice. Seraphine's power flared brightly, not in fear, but in control. She was no longer a girl who trembled before darkness. She was a force of will, tempered by experience, courage, and the bond she shared with Cale. The sorcerer struck with all his might, but Cale and Seraphine countered, their movements precise and coordinated. In a final surge of power, Seraphine extended her hands, channeling both light and shadow. The force was immense, and the sorcerer's magic recoiled, breaking apart in silver sparks that faded into the stone floor. Breathless, Seraphine fell to her knees, exhausted but triumphant. Cale knelt beside her, placing a steadying hand on her shoulder. "You were magnificent," he said. "We were magnificent." Tears came to Seraphine's eyes, not from fear, but from relief and pride. She had faced the shadows of her past, mastered her power, and defeated a force that threatened not only her life, but the kingdom she was beginning to call home. The journey back to the castle was quiet. Seraphine leaned against Cale, feeling the steady strength of his presence. They did not need words, their bond spoke volumes. The kingdom awaited them, but now they faced it together, unafraid. Upon returning, the court gathered to witness their triumph. Whispers filled the hall, but this time they were words of admiration. The lady who had once been called broken now stood as a symbol of courage, wisdom, and resilience. Even those who had doubted her could not ignore her strength. Cale stood beside her, his hand brushing hers, a silent acknowledgement of the journey they had shared. "You are no longer just my ally," he said softly. "You are my equal, my partner, and my heart." Seraphine looked up at him, her own heart full. "And you are mine," she replied. "Not just a king, but someone I trust, someone I believe in." Their bond, forged through trials, shadows, and the unknown, blossomed into something deeper. It was not mere attraction, but respect, trust, and the quiet strength of two souls who had faced darkness and emerged stronger together. The night fell over Valdoria, and the castle was silent. Seraphine and Cale stood at the highest tower, watching the stars emerge. The air was calm, the wind gentle. The trials had ended, but the lessons remained. Strength was not just in magic or power, but in courage, trust, and the willingness to face the unknown with someone by your side. Yet, even as they watched the sky, Seraphine knew that shadows never disappeared entirely. There would always be challenges, whispers, and unseen forces, but now she was ready. She was no longer broken, she was whole, and she was stronger for it. Cale placed his hand over hers, their fingers intertwining. "Whatever comes next," he said, We face it together." Seraphine nodded, a smile touching her lips. Together! The kingdom of Valdoria stretched beneath them, bathed in the silver glow of moonlight. The forest had tested them, the shadows had challenged them, and the court had observed them. But now they had claimed their place, not as victims of fate, but as masters of their own destiny. And as the first light of dawn peeked over the horizon, the castle and the kingdom seemed to breathe with new life. A story of shadows, trials, and redemption had reached its first true conclusion. Yet in the hearts of Seraphine and Kale, the bond they had forged promised that their journey was far from over. Love, trust, and courage would guide them through whatever came next, and the legacy of the Broken Lady and the Alpha King would shine brighter than any darkness that remained. The stars twinkled above, a quiet witness to their triumph, and the wind whispered across the kingdom, carrying the promise of hope, strength, and the enduring power of a bond forged in shadows but illuminated by trust and courage. The night had ended. The dawn had come. And together, Seraphine and Kale stood ready to face all that the world would bring.